All right, let's go ahead and pick up now where we left off. The last couple of things we're going to talk about today really are going to just focus on, since you've already had a chance to play with DNS Express, you've seen how easy that is to use. We're going to talk about the GSLB, the Global Server Load Balancing, and what's involved with that. In Lesson 3, we're going to talk about the first two objects, data centers and server objects. We've already really covered this. This is sort of a review of really the use of the global server load balancing. This is essentially the LTM of the world. It lets us do the wide area load balancing, whereas LTM load balances between servers, DNS load balances between data centers. It uses the DNS concept, the DNS system, for the traffic management. So here, when users go to sea.zolox.com, they can get sent here, and sing.zolox.com, they can get sent here. It does that because of DNS name resolution. Unlike other DNS systems, BigIP DNS can monitor our site availability and performance. And that enables BigIP DNS to do intelligent DNS resolution. So even though it might have sent the request there, it's now going to send them here. So it can make smart DNS decisions, not just static DNS decisions. And that's all part of our global server load balancing. To set it up, there are several objects. You saw them on my agenda slide. Several different objects that we're going to create. The first is known as a data center object. Data center object is just a location. It's just a physical location where we're going to have applications, servers, all hosted. This could be in a physical data center. It could be in a public or a private cloud. Each one of those is going to be a data center object. It's going to be a collection of, a container of devices. So that's our data center object. That's the first thing we need to create. Then the second thing is known as a server, DNS server. It's a very generic name, but a DNS server is one of the objects that we're going to put in one of those data centers. One of the many objects. There's a lot of things that could be a server object. We could actually have another BigIP DNS as a server object. We could have a BigIP LTM. That could be a server object as well. Any one of our generic servers, just LAMP servers, IIS servers, any of those can be server objects. We can also use other load balancers as server objects as well. There's a lot of different types, and you'll see a list here in a few slides, a lot of different types of things that can be identified as a server object. It's just something that's going to go inside that data center. And we're going to be using a DNS, BigIP DNS is going to use the IP address of each of those server objects to identify its availability. So it's just constantly monitoring all of those servers, if we choose to, by the way. We have to configure it to do so, to make sure that they're available. Then the next thing is a virtual server object. This is not an LTM virtual server. This is a BigIP DNS virtual server. So just like an LTM virtual server, this is a listener. And it represents an application. That sounds just like an LTM virtual server. The difference is, here I've got a virtual server representing an application on this. This could be a LAMP server. This could be a Unix server. Has nothing to do with the BigIP. Neither does this one. So the virtual servers don't have to, they're not part of an LTM. They don't have to be a part of an LTM. They can be. We can also have virtual servers that are housed on an LTM as well. But the virtual servers are representing any application that's running on any one of those server objects that we've already configured. So I've got an FTP application here, and another FTP application here, and so on. We can also have the virtual servers representing applications in front of another load balancer as well. We're not just focused on the F5 stuff here.
Yeah.
And it's possible for any of these servers to host multiple applications. So server B hosts the FTP site and a port 80 site. So it has two listeners, two virtual servers, as does server M over here. So our next object type is our DNS pool, not an LTM pool. The DNS pool is a collection of these different virtual servers. Let's go back on that graphic again. So I have my HTTPS app pool. That's going to contain the two virtual servers that do HTTPS. The HTTP app pool contains the 4 virtual servers that host port 80. These are all the same website, by the way. That website is just located on multiple servers. They're not all behind an F5 device. One's here, one's behind this load balancer, another one's behind this load balancer, another one's there. But this pool contains all 4 of those virtual servers. Then this contains all 3 of my virtual servers that are hosting the FTP application. Again, none of which are on anything related to F5, BigIP. So that is our pool. Now, DNS is now going to do name resolution, all of the DNS query name resolution between those 2 server objects. So when somebody requests the HTTPS application, it's going to give them this address, give the next person this address, give the next person this address, and the next person this address, and so forth and so on. But that's just standard load balancing. By the way, as a review, if I'm just sending one here, and then the next one here, and the next one there, and the next one, what do we call that load balancing? Very good. But each one of these pools can have its own. So here I go there, 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 and there. Then I go there and there and there. Oh, but now I'm just going there and there. And oh, now I'm just going there and there. Oh, now I'm just going there and there. That could be our ratio load balancing. So we can have different load balancing methods on every single one of these virtual servers. In addition, each one of these pools. In addition, each pool can have its own monitoring method used to identify if the pool is available or not. So in this setup, DNS is using, as a review, it's using the IP address for the queries. That's the IP addresses that are being sent back. The ports are being used for the monitoring aspect. So we can identify if these items are up or down. That's our pool object. So we got the data center that contains servers. Each server can have a virtual server, and the virtual servers go inside of a pool. Finally, we've talked about this quite a few times here so far in the first 2 lessons, our wide IP. This is the final piece. So the wide IP is going to be what represents our host name, www.lorax.com. shop.lorax.com. And it must match whatever is out there in the internet. It must match what people are going to. So I have my wide IP for www.lorax.com. The wide IP is going to point to a pool, one of the pools that we have configured. So in this case, it's pointing to my HTTP pool. Now remember earlier today we looked at just a regular picture of a DNS server, and the DNS entry, the name entry, had 4 different web servers. 4 different web servers that it would send to. Well, we still have that. But those DNS servers are actually 4 different virtual servers now. So when somebody goes to access www.lorax.com, the final step of all that, .com, Lorax.com. That final step is going to bring us here. Hey, do you have an entry for www.lorax.com? Remember, we have all that order of precedence. The first thing we ever check, is there a wide IP that matches this? Hey, there is. There's the wide IP. So that wide IP is going to be what is going to answer this request. And it's going to pick one of those 4 virtual servers, which in this case is now going to send it to the configured application. That's the name, that's where the user is going to get sent to, essentially. That's where they're going to go. Now it is possible, we're going to see in a few more slides in the next lesson why we would do this, but it is possible that this wide IP could actually have more than one DNS pool configured. It's actually very possible, and we'll look at that in a few more slides. Remember, this lesson is really specifically talking about the first 2 object types, data centers and servers. So we're going to take a look at how to configure those 2 in the UI, and then you'll go in and play with those in your first exercise. So now everything we're going to be talking about is under the GSLB submenu here, starting with data centers. These are actually really easy to create. There's nothing other than names we're giving here. So for example, I'm going to give this data center a name. That's my Seattle DC. These 3 items here, description, location, contact, you'll notice there's no blue bar. That means they're not even required. You just put them there for help for other admins so they know a little bit about that. But the only thing that's really required is that we give that object a name. That's it. And so when I'm done, I now have 2 different data centers, my Seattle data center and my Singapore data center, currently with no servers in either one of them because I haven't created any yet. Now, we're about to start adding some servers. Some of those servers might be a Unix server, some of those servers might be an IIS server, some of those servers might be another load balancer. Some of those servers might be a BigIP. We might be adding a BigIP LTM or a BigIP DNS. So when we're going to be adding other BigIP objects as server objects, we're going to be using the iQuery protocol. This was something that was set up so that we could use DNS communication between different BigIP devices. This is what enables the BigIP DNS to receive all the configuration from another BigIP, the metrics from another BigIP, status from another BigIP. It needs to know all that to identify if it's up or down or what the, how utilized it is. It can't do that without the iQuery protocol. It also, this is how different BigIP DNS servers synchronize information back and forth, is with the iQuery protocol. Just as an FYI, it uses port 4353. And if the BigIP systems are behind any kind of a network firewall, you want to make sure that you open that port so that the communications can go through the firewall. And iQuery is always encrypted. That's important to note. So how do I do this? So it uses the iQuery protocol to do that. However, we still have to do a couple of things from the BigIP DNS before I can add this LTM as a server object. There are 2 things we have to do. Or a couple of things, actually. The first is we want to make sure we have network time protocol set up on both of the systems. They need to have the same time. So I want to make sure that we're using the same NTP server on both of them. The second thing is we're going to use the BigIP add command. We're going to do this from BigIP DNS, and we're going to be adding the IP address of another BigIP. So that's the BigIP we want to add as a server object. When we run this command, and hopefully we get success here, but what's actually happening in this command is this is what is enabling these 2 BigIPs to talk together by exchanging their SSL certificates with each other so that they trust each other. This is basically establishing a trust between the 2 BigIPs. So we need to run this command for every BigIP object we want to add as a server object. Then the second command is the big3d install command. Again, we'll run this from BigIP DNS for every BigIP we're going to be adding. Hopefully we get successful done. And what this does is this is what's going to enable the reporting of the metrics and configuration and so forth of that other BigIP system within our BigIP DNS. So we're going to do those two things first before we go to add this server object. Then we can go into the UI. And again, on the UI, we're going to start over on our GSLB to our server list, add a new server. We'll give the server any kind of a name. Of course, we want to give it some sort of a name that makes sense. This is my Seattle BigIP. Now remember I told you there's a lot of types of servers you can create. When we go to the product and select that drop down, you're going to see a pretty big list. These are all the different kinds of objects or server types that can be added as a server. But in this case, we're adding a BigIP. So we're going to leave that set to BigIP system. Then we have to select the data center. Remember, we have Seattle, Singapore. Which one is this going to? This obviously is going to Seattle, because that's the name of my item. Then down here under devices, this is where we're going to be adding the actual device itself. We'll click on the add button. And for the most part, you really just need the IP address there. The name is just any name you want to give it. Doesn't have to be any specific name. So that is the public-facing IP address. That's what's going to enable this DNS to go talk to that DNS. So the external IP address of that. If this BigIP happens to be behind a NAT, then you would want to have a translation address there. If it's not behind a NAT, you can leave that field blank. You click on add. There's our entry down. Oh, and then click on OK. There's our entry. Then we can scroll down a little bit. Remember, we want to do monitoring. We want to do monitoring so that we can identify if this item is up or down. And so we have our health monitors. We're going to use a standard BigIP monitor. That's the main monitor you're going to want to use from DNS to go monitor the health of another BigIP system. And then remember, what we're looking for on a server are virtual servers. We want to know which virtual servers are on there, what applications are being hosted on here. We can do that down here. On a BigIP, especially a BigIP LTM, there are a couple of ways we can do this. We can use virtual server discovery. That actually enables BigIP DNS to just find out all the virtual server applications that are on there and make them all virtual server objects. Anything that it finds on that LTM. We can do that with virtual server discovery. You'll do that in your exercise. If we decide we don't want to make every LTM virtual server on that BigIP one of our DNS virtual servers, then we could always add them manually. Just putting in the IP address and port of each virtual server. And then click on Finished. Now I can see my virtual server. I can see if it's up or down. That's based on that health monitor. And that's pretty much it. The data center that it's in and so forth. Right now there are no virtual servers attached because I chose not to enable discovery. If I had enabled discovery, within 8 or 10 seconds, if I refresh this page, this might go up to 4 or 5 or 6, however many virtual servers happen to be on that particular BigIP. Now let's say I'm adding a server, but it is not a BigIP. It's a LAMP server or a load balancer, another third-party load balancer. We can do that as well. So this is my Seattle server A. It's not a BigIP. From the product, we want to select the correct product. In most cases, if it's just a Unix box or an IIS server, we just select, actually no, IIS would be Windows 2000, potentially. We would just select generic host. Simple as that. And now we'll just put in the IP address Remember, translation is if it's behind a NAT device. Other than that, it's pretty much the same. After I click on Add, other than that, I'm going to select the data center. Is this going in Seattle? Is it going in Singapore? A health monitor. Now in this case, I'm not using BigIP because this is not a BigIP, so I'm just going to use a regular old HTTP health monitor and virtual server. Is there a virtual server I want to add? But we're going to do that later because we're not talking about virtual servers yet. We're only talking about server objects. And when I'm done, again, I will see my two objects now, my BigIP and my regular server object. And that's really all we're doing in this lesson is creating our data center and creating our servers inside of the data center. And that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to actually create a couple of applications on your LTM, a couple of regular web applications that point to the Lorax website and so forth. You're going to create two data centers. Then you're going to create a server object on DNS for one of our big IPs. We have two big IPs in this environment. So you're going to create a server object for the first big IP. You're going to run those two commands we talked about for the second big IP. Now the reason you don't have to run those two commands for the first big IP is because you're actually adding the big IP that DNS is on. So because we're adding itself as a server object, you don't have to say, trust yourself. It trusts itself by default. But we do have to run these two commands for the second big IP so that it does the server, the certificate exchange and so forth. And then you'll create the server object for the second big IP. And that's what you're going to do in this exercise. We'll take about 30 minutes for that. And then we'll finish up with the remaining objects after that.